They called it a welcome brief, but the air in Hangar 6 felt more like a trial. The cavernous space swallowed every sound, amplifying boo falls and the metallic rattle of weapons into a single, cold hum. The morning fog still clung to the tarmac outside, and through the open hangar doors you could see the ridge line where clouds snagged on pine tops like torn bandages. A folding table stood at the center, coffee urn, stack of forms, a bulletin board with the course schedule for the Crucible, an elite joint force assessment that ate reputations for breakfast. Above the board, someone had taped a hand-lettered sign, and no excuses. No mercy. No rank. When the woman walked in, the first thing people noticed was the scar. It ran from the hinge of her jaw down toward the notch of her collarbone, a pale seam that tried to disappear into the shadows of her neck, but never quite did. The second thing people noticed was her silence. Not shyness, silence, the deliberate kind, a decision hammered into habit. Her hair was tied tight, regulation, no makeup. She wore the same drab PT kit as everyone else, except her shorts were longer, and the sleeves of her shirt hung to the elbow even though the air held Florida's wet bite. She carried a duffel and a battered notebook with a cloth cover. Candidate roll call. The instructor's voice cracked like a whip. Master Sergeant Harrow, sinew and gravel, moved along the line with a tablet in hand. Candidates stood at attention, 60 of them, Rangers, Marines, aviators, intel officers, and a handful of civilians whose credentials were so redacted in the packet that their presence felt like a dare. 2 people had already dropped in processing due to heat exhaustion. It was 0830. Harrow barked names. Zhao. Here. Macready. Here. Nava. Here. Voss. The woman stepped forward, shoulders square. Harrow didn't look up. Voss, Alara. She nodded once. The pause that followed was microscopic but tense. Then, voice, candidate, Harrow said. We use voices around here. She reached to her throat like the gesture might explain itself. Then, quiet but unmistakable, present, Sergeant. It came out ragged. A few candidates on the flanks exchanged looks. Someone whispered, she smoked razor blades for breakfast? The cluster from 3rd Recon snickered. One of them, a blonde with the kind of grin people called charming until it wasn't, leaned right to be heard. Hey, it's Scarface. Your recruiter tell you we're not doing karaoke here? You only get to mime during the hostage scenario. Alara Voss didn't turn her head. Harrow glanced up now, his eyes a pale, dispassionate blue. Medical limitation, he said. She shook her head and handed him a laminated card from the pocket of her PT shorts. He read without changing expression. Vocal cord trauma, cleared limited use. Harrow handed the card back. You'll speak when directed. Understood. She nodded. The recon blonde name tape, Bishop, wasn't done. What is that, like a sympathy note? I should have brought my asthma card. Snorts. A Navy pilot with folded arms and a mile of attitude smirked. Nothing says elite like a doctor's note. Harrow let the laughter ride for exactly 3 seconds and then collapsed it with a look. You think anyone cares about your feelings? The Crucible starts now. You'll want to save your air for the hill. He pointed to the board. A topographical map glared back, a route winding up and down the ridgeline, annotated with sadistic detail. 12 miles. 75 minutes. Ruck is 50 pounds dry. Water and med kit do not count toward weight. If you return with less than 50 pounds, you will be dropped. He smiled without warmth. Some of you have already lost. They formed ranks at the starting line. The instructors checked the rucks, tipping, weighing, sniffing for the little cheats that revealed a candidate's character. Beside Alara, a tall intel officer with pinched shoulders kept glancing at her scar. He tried to smile. Failed. What happened? If you don't mind. Alara didn't answer. She tightened the waist belt on her ruck and looked at the ridge, calculating. He tried again. Friendly advice. The recon boys, they pick targets early. You keep your head down and save your breath, Perkins, Bishop said, stepping in with his grin. She's saving hers for when she has to explain how she came in last. Alara's eyes flicked to Bishop's boots. New laces. A knot that would slip under mud. She filed it away. The horn blew. The first mile was all noise. The scuffle of boots, the shouts, the rhythm of bodies shaking into cadence. Then the hills swallowed everything but breath. Florida hills were deceptive, short but cruel, like fists to the ribs. Sweating before mile 2, the air dense enough to chew, candidates began to string out. Bishop and his pack surged ahead, hungry for dominance. The Navy pilot fell in behind them, lean and efficient. Elara settled into a pace and stayed there. 2 steps 3. Breathe in, breathe out. She counted heartbeats. She let the noise fade until it was just terrain and the math of movement, foot placement, grade angle, energy bleed. How much power to spend on the climb versus the descent? At mile 5, someone fell. At mile 6, someone vomited water and bile, and Harrow stepped in without slowing to tell him the med tent was left. The road to disgrace was right. At mile 7, Bishop passed Elara on the return leg, already heading downhill. Keep going, Scar, he grinned and winked. At mile 9, a branch snagged the strap on Elara's ruck. She freed it without breaking stride. At mile 10, thunder muttered beyond the ridge, and the smell of rain came like metal. At mile 11, the path narrowed. Recent storms had washed a section into a narrow ledge choked with roots and loose sand. Left side sketchy, someone yelled. Elara knew it before the shout. You could feel sketchy terrain in your ankles before you saw it. She shifted weight, used the tree lean, and slid past a cluster of candidates stalled out, swearing. At mile 12 minus a sliver, she stepped back into the hangar's shadow with her ruck still 50 pounds. 78 minutes. Not great. Not last. You, Bishop said, sprawled on the concrete, shirt plastered to his chest with sweat, pointing at her as if calling a shot. You made it. I was worried. His tone said he wasn't. Harrow's clock clicked down the last 15 seconds before the cut. A red-faced ranger stumbled in right under the wire and kissed the floor. 2 others missed it by 10 and didn't argue when the clipboard came for their names. The laughter started again when the weigh-ins began. Not everyone. Just the ones who needed laughter like oxygen. The ones who needed a target to regulate their own fear. 50 even, an instructor announced. 47, he told another, try honesty next life. When Elara handed over her ruck, the scale read 52.3. The instructor grunted. Overachiever. Elara drew her shoulders back to ease the ache. Her throat pulsed with a familiar, useless ache where scar met living tissue. She swallowed air. It scraped. Harrow gestured. Hydrate. 10 minutes. Then classroom. The classroom was a cinder block box with a whiteboard and a projector older than most of the candidates. A storm had finally struck. Rain drummed the roof like 1,000 fingers. Someone had drawn a hangman gallows on the corner of the whiteboard and left it there, tiny and brutal. Harrow stood at the front with the remote. The screen bloomed to life with a slide that read, Scenario Orion. This course is not about your bench press, he said. We measure one thing, what you do when the map is a lie and the bullets are real. Orion is a simulation, multi-domain. You'll be broken into squads and you'll plan, not with perfect intel. He let that meaning soak, but with the mess of reality. Human, SIGINT, rumor, weather, broken equipment, crying civilians, and someone always trying to make your life shorter. The screen changed, satellite imagery of a jungle valley. Ridge lines riddled with clearings, a river like a silver wound. A village in the center, smoke curling from low huts. A red circle pulsed around a building with a tin roof. Target, unknown value. You will designate a squad lead and a deputy, Harrow continued. You will prioritize. You will argue. You will probably hate each other by sunset. A small smile cut his face. Good. Pressure reveals. The squads formed. Names on a list made strangers into teams. Elara found herself with 6 others, Perkins, the anxious intel officer, Bishop and his shadow, a lean corporal named Reyes, the Navy pilot, call sign Kestrel, a silent army medic with eyes that saw everything, and a calm specialist with sleeve tattoos of saints. Look at this, Bishop said, grabbing the mission packet. Don't worry, I can read big words. Perkins reached 2, careful. We should start with asset mapping. Who has language? Bishop laughed. Did you hear that? He said asset mapping like this is a PowerPoint contest. Kestrel rolled her eyes. You want to fly blind, Bishop? My name's Bishop, he said, smug, and yes, I do. I can smell a tin roof trap from a mile out. We burn it from the edges, drive them into the river. The packet says civilians, the medic said, voice even. You burn edges, you burn families. Bishop's smile showed teeth. We're playing war. Somebody forgot to tell them. Alara watched. The table between them became a battleground long before the simulation started. Personal gravity tugged shoulders into orbit, pulled voices up and down. She didn't reach for the packet yet. She listened. Okay, Perkins said, clinging to process. Let's build a board. We need calm windows and fallback points. If the target's unknown, then we need tiered actions so we don't. So we don't what? Bishop said. Trip over our shoelaces? Look, Scar here, he tipped his chin at Alara, hasn't said a word. Maybe let's start where it matters. Who's in charge? Reyes looked at Alara. No offense, but squad lead needs to command. How's she going to do that without a voice? Alara tilted the mission packet until the corner reflected the room's fluorescence and moved her gaze along the seams of it, noting where pages had been printed, where they hadn't. She could feel how the data had been built, the choices people made as they presented truth. She had spent years learning to hear what silence hid. The river on the satellite map had braided channels. The tin roof building was placed too cleanly in the dead center. It wanted to be the target. Things that wanted your attention were usually decoys. Harrow circulated, saying nothing, just watching. When he stopped near their table, the temperature dropped a degree. Bishop squared his shoulders like a rooster on the rim of a bin. I'll take lead, he said to Harrow's hovering presence, but mostly to the room. Marine recon. I've led units 3 times this size, and our medic can be my deputy. The medic's mouth tightened. My name is Sutter. I prefer to keep hands free to do medicine. Kestrel lifted her chin. I'll be deputy. I know the valley grade. Those ridges can eat comms alive. Bishop looked annoyed and then calculated. Fine, he said. We move fast. Alpha on the north ridge, Bravo on the south. Kestrel gets eyes from the canopy if we can rig a drone. Sutter and Perkins manage the village approach. Comms, what's your name? Gallo, said the tattooed specialist. I run nets. I also advise we don't slice ridges until we confirm river depth. That braided channel can swallow ankles and radios. Bishop shrugged. We'll wade where we need to. Water hurts less than bullets. Scar. Alara, Perkins said quietly, as if the name needed permission to exist. Alara can take rear security, Bishop finished. Minimal voice required. Harrow's attention ticked from face to face, then to Alara last. He didn't smile. Leadership is a choice, he said, addressed to no one and everyone. So is silence. He moved on. Perkins, embarrassed, pushed the map toward Alara anyway. You see anything we're missing? His voice trembled with the effort of treating her like an equal in a room that won points for not doing that. Alara looked at the satellite image again. The river's silver threads made a pattern she recognized. The braid was wrong for the season this region should have had, given the storm outside, which meant the image was at least 3 months old, which meant the sandbar indicated here would be gone, which meant Bishop's fast route would dump them waist-deep into a mud pocket that didn't simply slow movement, it trapped it. Perfect kill box. She opened her mouth to say one sentence and felt the familiar ache snap up her scar, the way old injuries became arguments your body had with your will. She closed her mouth. Bishop laughed, triumphant. Rear security it is. The first practical began in the kill house, a mock village with plywood walls and chalk dust for ghosts. Instructors banged pots and yelled and piped in recordings of babies crying because cruelty made good training. The scenario called for a negotiation at the entrance to the village. Bishop strode forward. Kestrel flanked. Sutter watched rooftops, jaw a locked hinge. A woman in a headscarf, an instructor with lines of fatigue painted under her eyes, stood in the doorway of a plywood house and spit out words in a dialect none of them had been taught. She held a child against her hip, a burlap bundle with a plastic doll head stuck at one end like a crude warning. Down the alley, a car backfired. 3 candidates flinched. Hands up, Senora, Bishop said, voice loud, useless. Back inside. The instructor stared, unblinking. Gallo hissed, you can't just inside. Bishop repeated, louder, and swung his rifle a degree left to scan the unseen. In the time it took his barrel to move, the woman tugged her sleeve in a sharp, practiced motion. It was an agreed signal in the scenario playbook, the kind that tells you the air is seconds from tearing. Contact, Kestrel began. A thunderclap from outside swallowed her voice. Instructors poured in from side streets. Smoke pellets hissed. The world turned milk-white and hot. Shots blink, but the brain doesn't care, snapped from windows. Someone shouted down, 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 and someone else screamed the name of a saint. Bishop dropped behind a water trough and opened fire at a silhouette that wasn't a silhouette. A pop flagged him with a fluorescent paint mark on his chest. Killed in scenario. Restart. Harrow called into the chaos, and the smoke sucked out of the room like a reverse miracle. He stood with the remote, expression still bland. You failed to recognize a prearranged signal from a local source. You escalated without translation, without confirmation, without control of your lateral flanks. His gaze fell on Bishop. You died loud. Snickers from other squads. Bishop's jaw flexed. He looked like a man trying to swallow a bottle. Perkins' hands trembled on his rifle. We need someone who can read signals, he said. You need speed. Bishop snapped, too fast. You need leaders who commit. Scar can keep watching our backs. Sutter, who had said little, glanced at Alara. Rear security matters, he said, deliberately neutral. You catch things back there. Things other people miss. He meant it kindly, and yet it sounded like exile. Alara turned away from the table while they bickered, just enough that her body blocked her notebook. She slid her cloth-covered book onto her thigh and wrote with a pencil so dull it barely scarred the paper. Tin roof decoy. River braid old. Smoke pellets timed to backfire. Hand signal. Draw on cuff, 3 tug, warning. She wrote the warning in a code she hadn't used in years, not because she needed the protection, but because muscle memory comforted. A lattice of dots and dashes and short hash marks that looked like nothing to untrained eyes. Ghost language. She counted windows. Angles of approach. If you came through the alley at 45 degrees, the shadow of the awning would hold you just long enough to get painted from the roof. If you came from the garden footpath there overgrown, pretending to be weak ground, you could flank under the sight line. When Harrow walked past, he didn't pause, but she felt the way his gaze snagged on her pencil for a beat, maybe 2. The second run went worse. Bishop forced it faster. Kestrel pushed back and got steamrolled. They missed the signal again. Someone threw a smoke pellet too soon. Gallo cursed and lost his net for a full 30 seconds, while the enemy jammed the frequency by simply shouting louder. They aborted with 3 dead in scenario and a civilian casualty that felt like an indictment even though everyone kept saying it's training. In the break between runs, Bishop paced, furious heat radiating off him. He stopped inches from Alara, close enough that she could smell the sour bite of adrenaline sweat. He tapped her notebook with a finger. What are you even writing? He asked, incredulous. Poetry? She kept her pencil on the paper. Moved it. Wrote, brace laces. Left boot. At speed plus mud equals slip. He blinked, baffled at the words and at the way she had chosen to deliver them. What? He said. She put the pencil down, raised one finger, bent, tugged his left bootlace. The knot loosened like an accusation. He looked down, cheeks darkening. It's nothing, he said, too fast, kicking his heel like he could tighten the knot with contempt. You think you're clever. Clever would be telling you to double knot, Sutter said dryly. Or to listen when someone who watches the ground tells you you're about to trip. Bishop's eyes flicked to Sutter, then back to Alara. Rear security, he said again, like a curse now. Stay out of the way. Alara's throat ached with the words she didn't spend. Years ago, a blast wave had ripped the air from her lungs and burned the cords that gave breath shape. She had chosen since then to use her voice like a currency. Spend only what you could afford. She reached for her canteen instead. Drink. Let the water burn. She looked at the tin roof building on the screen. She thought about the coded reports she had written in another life, and the letters she had never signed with her real name, and the call signs she still heard on nights when sleep stuttered. Ghost Key, they had called her once, for the way she could open doors other people didn't know were doors at all. She placed her pencil tip in the corner of the page and began to draw a small, barely visible map. Not the map everyone else saw, but the one she knew was there. The one you learned if you survived long enough to understand that the world always hid a second layer beneath its lies. Harrow called the third run. Rain hammered the roof. The hangar leaked in thin lines like veins. Kestrel met Alara's eyes in the mirror of a window and lifted her chin an imperceptible degree. It was the smallest invitation. It was also the first. The storm hadn't let up all night. Snow hammered the tin roofs of Fort Dominion until every bunk rattled with the sound. At dawn, the squad was summoned to the briefing hall. Colonel Brandt stood at the podium, his eyes as sharp as the mountains outside. The projector hummed, throwing a grainy map of the valley onto the wall, a valley choked with pines, ravines, and an old concrete bunker at its center. "This is Exercise Valkyrie," he barked. "You will breach and secure the comms node. Expect full resistance. Automated turrets, electronic warfare, drone swarms. Coordination is key. Failure will be noted." His gaze swept the room, but when it landed on Elena Varga, it slid past like she was transparent. Harris stepped forward before anyone else could. "I'll take lead." His tone wasn't a request. Lefebvre swaggered up beside him. Kestrel adjusted her console headset. Elena remained where she stood until Brandt finally muttered, "Captain Varga, rear observation." The dismissal was deliberate. Harris grinned like a wolf. Perfect spot for mute. Less chance she trips over herself. Laughter rippled through the room. Elena simply opened her notebook and pressed her pencil to the page. They deployed in armored carriers, engines groaning against the snow. Inside, soldiers checked optics and boasted about kill counts in past simulations. Harris leaned close to Connors and stage whispered, "Let's hope our silent mascot doesn't get frostbite before we even fire a shot." Connors snorted, loud enough for the cabin to hear. Elena sat with her duffel at her boots, listening to the static fizz in her earpiece. To others it was noise. To her it was rhythm, 12 seconds on, 2 seconds clear. A pattern. She jotted it down, unseen. The valley opened before them, vast and white. The squad pushed south, ignoring the brief gesture Elena made toward the ridge. What's she gonna do, write us a love poem? Harris jeered, and the laughter carried them forward. Then the valley erupted. Simulated IEDs shook the ground, plumes of smoke turning the snow gray. Turrets hidden under ice sheets roared blanks into the field. Drones dove, painting helmets with red beams. In seconds, 3 soldiers were tagged dead, blinking sensors cutting them from the exercise. "Contact!" Lefebvre bellowed, firing wildly. Harris shouted into dead comms, fury rising. Kestrel slammed her console in vain. The network was gone, smothered by jamming. Panic bled through the squad, movements erratic, shouts overlapping. Elena crouched behind a snowbank, her notebook balanced on her knee, her pencil racing. She charted the pulse of the jammers, 12.7 seconds, a 2-second lull. Enough. She tore the page, shoved it at Gallo. "Transmit on the gaps. Rotate through prime frequencies." Gallo's eyes widened. He obeyed. Static cracked, then cleared. Voices snapped back online. Relief roared through the squad, but Harris's relief curdled into rage. He stomped over, snatched Elena's notebook, and flung it into the snow. "You undermined me. You think scribbles make you commander." Pages fluttered, wet and ruined. The others watched, some uneasy, others amused. Connors muttered, "Captain Mute's magic diary." Sutter, the medic, said quietly, "She just gave us calms. Without her, we'd be finished." "Coincidence?" Harris barked. "She's a liability. And I'll prove it." He jabbed a finger toward the ridge, where the concrete bunker loomed, turrets glowing like eyes in the storm. "She leads the breach." The squad snickered. "Perfect. Let's watch her choke." They advanced under fire, snow spraying up like fountains. Elena moved first, stepping into the kill zone while turrets roared. She didn't run blindly. She waited, listening. A lull, half a heartbeat long. Then she sprinted, slid behind a half-buried jeep. Another lull. A smoke canister rolled wide, blooming white. She darted again, her timing flawless. The squad froze. Harris cursed, but then followed, copying her line. One by one, the others mimicked her rhythm, moving when she moved, hiding when she crouched. What moments earlier had been chaos turned into strange order, an order they didn't understand but couldn't deny. Within minutes, they poured through the bunker's threshold. The sensors flipped green. Objective secured. Fastest breach of the day. Colonel Brandt's voice thundered from the loudspeaker, sharp with disbelief. Squad 3, mission accomplished. Record time. Applause echoed from the observation deck. But in the snowfield, silence weighed heavier than victory. Harris stood, chest heaving, unable to speak. The others glanced at Elena, not mocking now, but wary. She bent to retrieve her notebook, brushing snow off the cover. As she pulled her glove tighter, her sleeve slid back just enough to reveal ink. A lattice of numbers and sigils burned into her skin. Not decoration. Not vanity. Kestrel's eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no words came. Sutter caught the look, followed her gaze, and froze. That tattoo wasn't rumor. It was real. The mark of Ghost Key Division. A unit whispered about in NATO halls. Operatives who lived in shadows. Codebreakers who unlocked battlefields. The kind of people you didn't mock if you wanted to keep breathing. Elena pulled her sleeve back down, face calm, eyes unreadable. Around her, whispers began to coil through the squad. Harris didn't notice. His pride was still bleeding. But the others looked at her differently now, as if the scar on her cheek and the silence in her throat suddenly meant something more. That night in the barracks, no one laughed. The nickname Captain Mute lingered in the air, but softer now, like a word people were afraid to say too loudly. Elena sat at her bunk, notebook open once more, pencil scratching quietly. Her scar caught the light, her sleeve drawn carefully down. The unit's eyes kept drifting toward her, each of them wondering the same thing. Who is she really? The storm broke at midnight. Wind screamed down the valley like artillery fire, rattling windows and shaking the barracks' steel frames. Soldiers tossed on their bunks, boots thumping the floor as they muttered curses at the cold. Elena Varga sat upright, her notebook open on her knees, pencil whispering across the page. The others had seen enough by now to know those pages weren't idle doodles. They were maps of silence, patterns inside chaos. Harris pretended not to notice, but the way his jaw tightened every time she wrote betrayed the truth. Her presence gnawed at him. The colonel entered before dawn, his coat dusted white with snow. Alert drill, he barked. Live engagement. No simulations. We have a security breach on the eastern perimeter. Unknown hostiles. Not part of the training. The room froze. For weeks they'd been told this mountain was a fortress. Nothing pierced its defenses. Yet the colonel's face was grave, his voice clipped. This is not a drill. You will respond as one. Harris slapped his chest plate on, already shouting. You heard the man. Form up. Let's move. He shoved past Elena as if to erase the unease from yesterday. But when they poured into the snow-choked valley, the air told a different story. Gunfire echoed sharp and real. Not blinks this time. Real muzzle flashes lit the ridge. Drones whined overhead, hostile signals slicing into their channels. Comms jammed again. Gallo hissed, banging his headset. This isn't training kit. Someone brought military grade. Panic rippled through the ranks. A German lieutenant was cut down in the first burst, paint sensors replaced by real blood soaking the snow. Screams rose, raw and human. Harris barked orders no one could hear. His voice cracked, echoing uselessly against the roar. Soldiers scattered, stumbling into drifts, firing blind into trees. Elena crouched low, snow biting through her gloves, pencil already moving. She counted the pulses in a static, tracked the rhythm of hostile fire. This wasn't chaos to her, it was code. And code could be broken. A blast rocked the ridge. Lefebvre's men staggered back, one of them clutching a shredded arm. The line was collapsing. Harris turned on Elena, desperation wild in his eyes. "Do you owe something? You cracked their games, now crack this." His words were spit more than plea, but the squad's eyes were all on her. Kestrel's, wide and trembling. Sutter's, grim but steady. Connor's smirk finally gone. Elena pulled her glove off with her teeth. For a heartbeat she hesitated, then shoved her sleeve up. The tattoo glistened black against pale skin, numbers and sigils braided like a cipher. Gasps tore through the squad. Harris swore under his breath. She tore a page from her notebook, scrawled fast, and thrust it at Gallo. "Transmit on prime intervals. Triple hop. Rotate at Fibonacci." Her voice rasped, scarred chords scraping, but steady enough. He obeyed instantly. A moment later, comms cleared in a narrow band. "Holy hell," Kestrel whispered, clutching her console. She opened a channel. Elena didn't stop. She pressed her back to the frozen jeep, eyes closed, listening. Every muzzle flash had a rhythm. Every drone sweep, a blind spot. She mapped them in her head, breath sinking with the storm. Then she moved. She sprinted through open snow, rolling behind a turret nest. Her knife flashed once, severing the power cable. Spark spat, turret dead. She gestured sharply, silent signals the others had never seen but instinctively understood. Lefebvre's men moved left. Kestrel's drone swooped to blind the ridge. Harris hesitated only a heartbeat before following. For the first time, he wasn't leading, he was obeying. The squad moved like they had never moved before, each step driven by Elena's signals. They flanked the hostiles, clearing them one by one. Her pencil-sketched map came alive in flesh and fire. Where she pointed, they advanced. Where she crouched, they held. Her silence became language. When the last hostile fell, snow settling on still bodies, the valley rang only with the squad's ragged breath. The colonel's voice finally cut through on the reopened channel. "Squad 3, perimeter secure. Losses minimal. Extraction inbound." His tone wasn't clipped this time. It was shaken. Back in the hangar, the survivors slumped against steel walls, helmets in their laps. Harris dropped heavily onto a bench, his pride ground to ash. For once, he didn't speak. The others looked at Elena with something closer to awe than fear. She stood apart, wiping blood from her gloves, notebook tucked under one arm. Kestrel broke the silence first. "That tattoo," her voice was barely a whisper. "Ghost Key Division." Sutter's eyes narrowed. "I thought they were rumor." "They are," Elena rasped, her voice raw, low. "And I was never here." The words landed heavy, final. The squad sat in stunned silence, each of them replaying every laugh, every insult, every time they'd called her dead weight. Harris rubbed his face with trembling hands. "God help me," he muttered, "we mocked a ghost key." No one laughed now. The base was never the same after that night. Snow still hammered the rooftops, drills still ran at dawn, but something in the air had shifted. Where once Elena Varga walked invisible, mocked as Captain Mute, now silence followed her, an attentive, watchful silence. Soldiers stepped aside when she entered the mess hall. Conversations lowered when she sat, and for the first time since arriving, no one dared joke about her scar, her silence, or her notebook. Harris avoided her eyes for days. His swagger was gone, ground down to something rawer. In the barracks, he cleaned his rifle alone, shoulders hunched. Once when she passed, he opened his mouth to speak, maybe an apology, but no words came. He looked away, shame burning red in his ears. It wasn't just Harris. Connors, the youngest, who had sneered the loudest, now watched her with the restless awe of a recruit who'd seen a myth step out of the shadows. He tried once to strike up small talk, fumbling with words, but Elena gave only a quiet nod. It was enough. The nod meant he wasn't beyond forgiveness, even if she never said so aloud. Then came the review board. Colonel Brandt summoned the unit to the briefing hall, his medals gleaming under fluorescent light. His face was unreadable as he paced. The exercise logs had been reviewed, drone footage, comms records, body counts, They all told the same story. Without Elena, the squad would have been annihilated. With her, they not only survived, they executed faster and cleaner than any team in the program's history. Captain Varga, Brandt said, his voice carrying a weight it had never held before. Step forward. Boots echoed as she obeyed. The squad stiffened, eyes fixed on her. Brandt studied her a long moment. When you arrived, I questioned why you were here. You said nothing. You let them laugh, let them doubt. Yet when the test came, not the one on paper, not the one on schedule, but the test that decides life or death, you answered without hesitation. You led, you broke the code, you saved this unit. His jaw tightened. I've never seen Ghost Key ink in person. Until now. Gasps fluttered around the room. Harris shifted, his fists clenching at his sides. Brandt's voice softened, just slightly. I should reprimand you for concealing your identity, but I won't. Because secrecy is your nature. Instead, I will commend you for discipline, for restraint, for proving that respect is earned not through noise, but through truth revealed at the right moment. He saluted her. Sharp, crisp, the colonel of Fort Dominion, saluting the woman he'd once dismissed. For a heartbeat the room was still. Then, one by one, the squad followed. Lefebvre first, his grin gone, replaced by sincerity. Kestrel next, eyes shining. Even Connors, his hand trembling as he raised it. Finally, Harris, last of all. His salute wavered, shame heavy in his throat, but he held it until she returned the gesture with calm precision. The sound of boots snapping together filled the hall like thunder. Afterward, in the barracks, the atmosphere shifted completely. Soldiers sought her counsel in quiet moments, asking about code breaking, about silent signals, about how she had known where the gaps in the noise would be. Elena answered sparingly, her voice still raw, but her silence now carried gravity instead of ridicule. When she spoke, every ear leaned closer. Sutter, the medic, sat with her one evening, staring into the snowstorm outside. You let them call you nothing, he said quietly, until the right moment to show them you were everything. Elena didn't reply. She didn't need to. Weeks later, the program ended. The squads lined up on the frozen parade ground for graduation. Flags whipped in the wind, medals gleamed, and families filled the bleachers. Brandt gave his speech about unity, discipline, and strength, but all eyes weren't on him. They drifted again and again toward Elena, standing at the far end of the line, scar catching the light, notebook tucked under her arm. When her name was called, the applause was louder than any before it. Harris himself stepped forward, presenting her citation with stiff formality. For a breath, he held her gaze. I was wrong, he muttered, barely audible. About all of it. Elena gave a single nod. That was enough. The final salute came, rifles raised, boots slamming in unison, and as the echo rolled across the valley, Elena felt the weight lift. She had endured the shame, carried the silence, and when the storm demanded it, she had revealed what lay beneath. Now, even the harshest voices had no choice but to honor her. When the parade ended, and soldiers embraced their families, Elena walked alone toward the ridgeline. Snow crunched under her boots. From her pocket, she pulled a scrap of paper, one torn from her notebook, filled with code, symbols, and a simple phrase scrawled beneath, "Let them underestimate you. The truth will speak when you cannot." She tucked it back, raised her face to the wind, and smiled, just faintly. The woman they had called Captain Mute walked away not as dead weight, not as a ghost, but as the one voice the entire unit would never forget.